Hello, my name's Keith Clifton. You'll know my son and daughter Kevin and Joanne Clifton, who were involved in Strictly Come Dancing, and they won a glitter ball each. I've written a story, I hope you like it. It's called Dylan and Mr. Quickstep. It had been a very tough year for everyone. A very nasty virus, worse than flu, had spread throughout the country, making lots of people very ill. The Prime Minister had told people to stay indoors as much as possible to stop it spreading. Older people were especially at risk, so they stayed at home more than anybody, not coming out at all, getting their food delivered by supermarket vans or volunteers from charities. Many of these older people hadn't seen their families for months and felt very lonely, even more lonely than normal, because sometimes families don't even find the time to see them anyway. Being old isn't fun, and when you can't even go out and talk to people, you have to sit and watch the television for hours with endless bad news and silly game shows. Henry Barnacle was 86 years old. He lived on his own in a small terraced bungalow in an unfashionable part of town. He argued with his neighbours about their trees overhanging his fences, and he chased off dogs who left him little presents on his front grass. He was very grumpy indeed. His only pleasure every week in those dark and miserable days leading up to Christmas was watching Strictly Come Dancing on the television, because Henry Barnacle used to love dancing. He was a regular at the Gaiety Ballroom, waltzing around the floor with every available lady. He was a favourite there, that's for sure. One lady called Margaret even tired him out regularly by insisting to dance every Quickstep with him. By, she was a dancer, Henry thought to himself, smiling one of his rare smiles. My feet had more blisters than legs on a centipede. Henry rubbed his knees. If they hadn't caused so many problems, he would have continued dancing. Who knows where his life would have taken him, maybe even with Margaret. He put his walking frame aside, sat down heavily on his armchair, picked up his cheese and pickle sandwich and switched on the television. The Strictly Come Dancing theme tune started playing. Grumpy Henry's weekly and only time of joy was about to begin, and he wasn't lonely for a full hour. At the same time, 11-year-old Dylan and his family did the same. Dylan attended the local dance school and was getting rather good at it with his partner Aoife. Watching Strictly was a must, and many a long hour was spent discussing the merits, performances and stumbles of the celebrities. The show opened with a big happy group dance by the professionals, dedicated to all the lonely people who had been affected by the virus and its restrictions. It was, as usual, brilliant, and Dylan's front room exploded with applause. Dylan's mum supped her tea and said, "It really must be difficult for all those living on their own. I hope programmes like this make them happy." "Well, dancing in general makes people happy, Mum," replied Dylan. "It releases something in your brain," somebody said, "and it keeps you fit as well." "I would love to think that there are a lot of older people dancing away in their own homes," said Mum. "Well, yes, but not those living alone," said Dylan's dad. "A lot of people I deliver food parcels to are on their own. They've got nobody to dance with, no partner, no dancing." Dad had offered to help with Reverend Praiseworthy's Help the Lonely appeal, collecting and distributing food parcels to the elderly and vulnerable. Dylan watched Wayne Rooney, a recently retired famous footballer, charge headlong through a quick-step that defied explanation, except that it looked vaguely like a cattle stampede. His efforts brought the audience to their feet, clapping and shouting as if England had won the World Cup. "But they love watching it," Dylan said quietly. "Pardon?" said Mum. "I said the old people love watching dancers," replied Dylan. "Why don't me and Aoife go with Dad on his deliveries and dance for the people in their front gardens? We can play music off my phone through a little speaker." "It's okay by me," said Dad. "Ask Aoife." Dylan rang his dance partner, who agreed enthusiastically. They decided to start the next day. Dad picked up his grocery bags and his list of addresses, and off went the three of them to start his round. The lady at the first house watched, nodded, then closed the door. The couple at the next house watched from the window and smiled. The elderly man at the third house came to the door in pyjama bottoms and a Christmas jumper. He loved watching them dance and joined in enthusiastically. His blood pressure went up, but his pyjama trousers were in danger of slipping down. Dylan and Aoife turned away as he grappled with the offending garment. They knew the lady at the next house. Peggy Bliss had helped with serving tea and coffee at the dance school a couple of times. She said it helped to see people, as it was quite difficult in these times living alone. She was thankful for Dad's bag of food and delighted to watch Dylan and Aoife dancing in the garden. She clapped wildly when they finished and tears formed in her eyes. Dylan hoped to make people smile, not cry. "That was so nice," she said. "What a lovely idea. I'm sure everybody will appreciate it. I certainly did. I used to dance a bit years ago, you know. I wasn't as good as you two, but I loved it. My body creaks a bit now, but life is much better when you dance, don't you think?" "That's what I say. Now off you go, or you'll not get round everybody." She picked up her bag and went inside. "People like this idea," said Dad. "Well done." They delivered 6 more bags and had only 1 left. "It's a Mr. Barnacle at number 47 Glum Street." "Well, that doesn't sound very nice, does it?" said Aoife. Dad parked up and collected his last bag. Dylan and Aoife carried their equipment into the front garden as Dad knocked on the front door. Henry Barnacle opened the door and scowled. "Get off my lawn," he shouted. Startled, the children stepped back. "Here's your bag of food, Mr. Barnacle. My son and his partner thought it would be a nice idea to dance for everyone, just to raise people's spirits. If you don't want them to, please say so." Henry rubbed his stubbly chin with his hand, then rested it back on his walking frame. His face resembled a bulldog chewing a wasp. "All right, but make it quick. I'm freezing." Dylan and Aoife started the music and started their energetic jive right there on his lawn. At first, Henry just stared. He then started rocking his head from side to side. His hands and feet started tapping along to the music. At the end, he showed a little smile. "Thank you," he finally said. "I did enjoy that. Took me back to my dancing at the Gaiety. I was good, you know. The ladies called me Mr. Quickstep." He was remembering the great times he had. "Especially with Margaret. I called her Ginger Margaret after the film star Ginger Rogers because she wore a white dress with feathers on. She moved away and I broke my hip tripping over a silly old moo called Doris Dipstick. Never got going again." He stared into the ground. "Right," said Dad. "We'll be off then." They turned towards the car. "Thank you for the display, you kids. You're very good. Keep doing this. Life is much better when you dance. Come back soon." He turned and went inside. Dad, Dylan and Aoife climbed into the car. Dylan was frowning and thinking. Something was tickling the back of his mind. "I've got an Auntie Peggy," said Aoife, drawing a face on the window with her finger. "Uncle Barry calls her Peggy, but her real name is Margaret. I don't know why. Seems a lot of Margarets get called Peggy." Dylan sat up straight with a start. "Do you remember what Peggy Bliss said?" "Life is much better when you dance," Aoife replied. "They both said it. I'm sure they did. That's a big coincidence, isn't it?" Dad and Aoife agreed. The next day they went back to see Peggy. After much discussion, they asked her about the white dress with feathers on. "I've still got it somewhere," she said. They finally convinced her to put the dress on, her favourite from her dancing days. "Come with us," Dad said. They drove to Glum Street. "Why are we here?" Peggy inquired. "You'll see," replied Dylan, who got out and walked to the door of number 47. He knocked and Henry opened it. "If you want your food back, I've eaten it," he said sharply. "No, no," said Dylan. "We have a special delivery." Peggy Bliss got out of the car. The milky sun made her dress shimmer. Henry looked at her. His face changed from very sour to sweet recognition. "Ginger Margaret?" he asked. "Mr. Quickstep?" she asked back. Peggy walked towards him. Henry started to push his walking frame forward, then stopped, realizing that social distancing didn't allow them to touch. All these years had passed, but they couldn't hug. So near and yet so far. Quick of foot and quick of mind, Henry picked up his walking frame, extended it towards Margaret, and carefully walked towards her. She grasped the legs of the frame, and they gazed at each other, together again. Aoife started playing Fred Astaire, singing about his top hat, white tie and tails. Henry looked at the beautiful woman in front of him and asked, "Shall we dance?" "I would love to," she replied. "Life is better when you dance," they said in perfect unison. Dylan, Aoife and Dad watched as two elderly people, not lonely anymore, with memories flooding back, danced in the pale winter sunshine.